Well, welcome to this, my 101st LinkedIn Live, and delighted to be with Danny Campbell. I'm in Glasgow today, and I'm at his business, Hoko, the Homeowner's Architect. So, Danny, can you begin, please, by telling us a bit about yourself and just what makes you tick?
Sure, thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm Danny, the founder of Hoko. Hoko is a residential architecture firm. Um, what makes me tick is probably my highly competitive nature. I think I've always been a very competitive person. I still play sports and do all these different things, and it's something that my close friends and family always will laugh about. So I suppose for me, it's being competitive, and I've managed to channel that into something that I really love, which is business. And that's what really gets me out of bed in the morning.
Okay, so why did you decide to set up your business at was quite a young age?
It was so. I set up Hoko at the very start of 2016. So I just turned 25. I'd just come back from Vancouver at the time, where I'd been playing rugby and having a bit of time away after completing my master's degree. And I set it up, in all honesty, as a way of making some quick money to go back to Canada and go back to having more fun and playing rugby. So um, those plans were dashed shortly after my long-term girlfriend at the time had come to visit me, and we got the rather exciting news that we were unexpectedly about to have a baby. And it was that moment where I had a decision to make of whether I was going to go down the self-employed business owner route or go down the more traditional route of getting a job. And it was that junction in my life where I decided, do you know what, I'm just going to do this. So that's why the age was a factor as a moment in time.
Okay, so tell us then a bit about Hoko and principally what problems you're actually trying to fix with it.
Okay, so it ties in quite nicely to the last answer. So when I started running Hoko, I was doing all sorts of random bits and bobs. I was doing a bit of graphic design, I was doing some artwork, I was doing some small scale architecture stuff. And what I found was that with doing the small scale architecture projects, that I had probably a naivety and an optimism that made me very responsive to the type of clients I was able to get. And they were only small scale homeowner clients, people doing internal remodeling, maybe a small porch extension. But because I was so enthused and so engaged, I was getting this little bit of an edge on other people who were competing for work, who were bidding against me. And it was that sort of feedback that I tapped into quite quickly. And I realized that, do you know what, maybe there's an opportunity in this and doing this thing on a slightly bigger scale. So I realized that that market was fundamentally underserved, and that was because a lot of the architects who they were working with, while some of them were really brilliant, their time was totally strapped by doing all sorts of other bits of running around. And the fundamental thing I struck upon first was maximizing my own time to spend with clients, because that was the thing I found I was quite good at. And that was basically the first moment where I realized that there was an opportunity to solve the problem for homeowners, which was giving them an experience of architecture that was way beyond what other people, were providing at the time. As time's gone on, I've got to know the market a lot better. My initial naivety has gradually evolved into a shameless optimism about what can be done within the industry. And I've realized that there's more problems to be solved along that journey. So Hoko fundamentally is trying to solve the experience of changing your home, whether it's extending, altering, or remodeling, up to and not beyond new builds. So we don't take on new builds. It's everybody who's trying to remodel, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, now I've noticed that sometimes in the press, Hoko's been described as Uber for architecture. Why is it a fitting analogy, or do you think it's a fitting analogy?
Well, I'd like to think in the scale that we're growing, it'll hopefully one day become a suitable analogy. There's lots of things about Uber that carry really negative connotations. So, ignoring those, the one piece that I think why it was struck on by a PR guy once upon a time was that we were trying to create something that wherever you were in the UK, if you wanted to extend it all to your home, you knew you were going to get consistency. And if anybody can throw their mind back to a time before Uber, arriving in somewhere like Manchester or Liverpool or anywhere, you'd have to find a taxi. And where do you go to find one? It became this kind of maze of, going through Google or going even through like before that, like the Yellow Pages and stuff to find a local taxi service. And architecture is the same. Small scale architecture is the exact same. There's around 50,000 architects in the UK. And the ones that do extensions, nobody's heard of them. If you're a normal person who doesn't know an architect, where are you going to go to find one? How do you know what level of service you're going to get? Because it's not just architects. There's, technicians, there's people who aren't qualified. I was one of them at a time as well. And these people start their career with the absolute best intentions. But the rule book that we get given by like the RIBA and the ARB, it fundamentally ignores homeowners, which means that they're kind of perceived in the construction industry as end up being more trouble than they're worth. And that's why the level of service is so disparate, across the nation and across the sector. So I think that's the one thing we're trying to solve, which is when people think extension or home remodeling, they think of HOCO. And I think that's hopefully where the analogy was coming. On top of that, how tech enabled we are as well.
Yeah, very good. And I suppose, a lot of architects or the architectural firms, they're sort of going for the big new developments, I guess the more sort of sexy developments, rather than, refurbs, remodels, extensions, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So when you start in first year, you do a 3 meter by 3 meter box, and every year you do a bigger project. And then when you go to the the stage 5, the final year reviews, they're doing master plans for airports. Then they go off into profession, and they're doing nothing like that. And the whole industry has built up this idea that big projects are aspirational. And the reality is, I think for a lot of architects who work on these big projects, it's reasonably tedious. If we're all completely honest with ourselves, they're not exciting. You're not really doing design. You're not really doing client-facing stuff. You've got the support network of a big team, and it fits within, the status quo of what, the governing bodies prescribe to us. But the small-scale stuff is just seen as an absolute afterthought. And the reality, I think, for our architects and for me in our whole business purpose, there is so much more value in working with real people. I think it's probably the only corner of the whole construction industry where people say thank you and they really, really mean it. And to us, that's really worthwhile doing.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak as a homeowner who 13 years ago built on an extension to our house for my wife's parents. Her mum doesn't keep well, so we wanted to bring them up from England and live next door to us, and we needed the services of an architect and obviously to design an extension which is basically like a second home on the end of our house. So I understand it as well, and it's made a huge difference to our family's life. So you're actually making a difference for people.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the benefits. Could you tell us what are the other sort of main benefits for homeowners in using HOCO for architecture? And I also think you've got some wraparound services as well.
That's right. And we didn't set out to create all these kind of turnkey options for people. But one thing we touched upon probably was around this time last year was clearly defining what the business purpose was going to be. And it wanted to be something, simple, but bold and ambitious. And what I ended up sticking with was the perfect client experience. So that is what we're trying to achieve. And we were managing to do that with the architecture. So, for a fixed price, they get these unlimited design revisions through concept stage, the cost plans, the virtual reality, the really interactive client dashboard, and all these kind of bells and whistles that make the experience really, really fun and exciting, as they expect it to be and as it should be. But that's only part of the problem. So once you kind of go through this process of designing something for someone and connecting with them, it eventually gets to a point where the thing has to become real. And that's when we realized that's where all the risk was. And we weren't dealing with that. And even though we had good tendering systems and ways of doing that, because the way the industry is set up, small contractors are in a very difficult situation where it is actually very difficult for them to do a really, really good job for people unless they're getting paid, a really good rate for it. And tendering kind of nullifies that to an extent. And one of the things that we discovered quite quickly was we need to own that process. We need to take it upon ourselves to make that work. So we set up HOCO Build. And HOCO Build has been this kind of incredible journey for us where we're entering into a totally different industry. And we do it with confidence because we know it'll get us closer to our end goal. And then sorting out the build is, again, just another kind of third of the problem. The final third is, you spend 12 months to 18 months on this project. You go to take photos of this amazing piece of architecture and you realize that it's just full of stuff from IKEA and it just doesn't do the space justice. And that's where we realize that people need interior design. They need, a personal shopper who just takes away the friction points, the burden, the learning curve, and looks after their budget. So we set up Hoku Shop, which makes everything a lot easier because one, we're taking away a lot of the aesthetic choices from the contractor and the interior aesthetic choices from the architect, which is probably would be equally as irresponsible. And we're putting it in like a separate package. So they've got their architectural setup, they've got their build setup, and then they've got their interior setup. And that in itself creates a whole package for people. And obviously people can take whichever bits they want, but overall we aim for people to go through from start to finish and get something that, you know, not only is perfect for them, but an experience that was worthwhile.
Great. So I can see it now, the benefits for the homeowner. What are the main benefits for architects? And, you know, are architects working for you on a subcontract basis, or do you get them onto PAYE, or how does it work?
So all of our architects are employed. We looked at a variety of different options. We looked at, you know, franchising. We looked at freelancers. We looked at subcontractor agreements, all that sort of stuff. And we realized that the fundamental problem within the industry was that there is a stigma against homeowners. And what we were trying to do was as much of a movement in the industry as it was a business model. And by inspiring our architects to see this client type differently and unburdening them to do their best work, we found that we are shifting perceptions. And as we're gaining notoriety through winning awards and all these different things, people are starting to see that homeowners are an aspirational client type. So our architects are employed. Their daily life is quite different to a normal architect. So if you imagine an individual sole practicing architect, his day is spent running around trying to run a business, trying to spend time with his clients, trying to do design, deal with engineers, deal with planning, deal with building control, all levels of conflict. And all on top of that, he's expected to come up with these amazingly wonderful, well thought out designs. We have completely unburdened our architects to do the things that they do best: spend time with clients and design. And when you have an architect that has the time to spend with their client and is willing to emotionally invest with the client and is actually encouraged to through like the business purpose, the results always turn out so much better. And one of the things that I think really freaks people out about Hoko is not just the fact that we've scaled so quickly and are employing everybody, but that we offer these limited design revisions at the start. And the reason we get away with that is, one, because we employ really good architects, first of all, and two, because time spent at the design stage is time well spent and it benefits everybody. Because the last thing you want to do is churn out some quick drawings and then get paid for it, and then you go through the process and you come unstuck later. So that's where we find the justification and the meaning of what we do.
Yeah, great. I noticed as well that you're, you know, you were describing there, Danny, everything that architects, you know, have to do. And I'm thinking at the same time as doing all of these things, they're also having to, in many cases, run their own business, which is, you know, there's a lot to do with running a business. They also have to get their future clients in as well, getting new business in. So it's a lot of work for them. So instead, if they come and work for you, they're just working on the client work without the worry, perhaps, of a lot of these other things.
Yeah. I mean, they get the best bits about being an architect. They spend face-to-face time with clients. They get to do tons of design. They get to see projects all the way through. And that is fundamentally what people generally, in my opinion, get into architecture for. You know, in first year, that's what you think you're going to be doing. I mean, the only probably difference is you probably imagine you're driving around in a convertible, like with your turtleneck and your nice fancy scarf and stuff. Maybe in the summer, that's kind of how the look's going to be. But I think the reality of the way the industry has kind of developed and the education system has developed, it doesn't really make that possible. And I think a lot of people that end up setting up their own practice, they do it with the best intentions, to have freedom and have all these different things. But because of the nature of the job, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of kind of really kind of straightforward, tedious bits to do as well. But it gobbles up your time and it devalues your time. And because it's so competitive and a lot of people are practicing without the protected title of architect, it drags down, you know, the value we can actually gain from what we've learned. So I think that the most important kind of takeaway point is that architects should be encouraged to do what they do best. And I think that's where we're kind of dragging the whole value of the profession up.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that you will have, you know, a steady stream of architects contacting you to offer their services because they would want to get involved with this.
Yeah. I mean, the last job advert we sent out, we had over 400 applicants. And I'm always completely overwhelmed by the quality of what's out there in the industry. Obviously, I'm an architect myself, but I look at these people's careers and what they've achieved, how they articulate themselves, how they talk about the profession, their enthusiasm, and it's just mind blowing. We've got this absolutely enormous talent pool out there. There's this huge demographic that's underserved, and I think we're just joining the dots. It's nothing actually that well, maybe there's a few kind of very innovative bits in there, but I think there's a really obviousness to it that people quite often say to me, it seems straightforward what we're doing, but it's not. It's quite a fundamental shift in your mentality first.
Yeah, and what I liked as well was the fact that you mentioned that you started by looking at the purpose. And I think, you're a millennial, you will have millennials and some older than that employed, but you've also got Generation Z coming up as well. And the younger generations definitely want to work with organizations that have got a clear purpose beyond just generating profit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I wanted to talk about COVID-19 a little bit. I'm guessing it's perhaps produced a greater demand for your services. I'm thinking about people choosing to refurb rather than move. And of course, there's a huge rise in home working with, whether it's remodeling rooms or whether it's building extensions or even, garden offices. So has COVID-19 actually produced a demand?
It has. It has. COVID has been probably pretty good for business. I feel genuinely guilty for saying that because I think so many people have suffered from it. I think the reality of any business is that was such an experience. If you've survived going through all the lockdowns, changing rules, all the restrictions, and you come out the other side and you're still going, you should be so proud of yourself because there's an infinite number of hurdles and hoops to jump through. I think the fact that people weren't allowed to go on holidays, people were getting a break from their mortgage, they were spending so much time in their homes. It probably could not be more of a perfect storm for us. That being said, we had some huge challenges that we had to be really brave about. The biggest one probably was scaling rapidly and geographically without being able to meet the people we were onboarding. That was a huge challenge for a company that's so purpose driven and so built on a culture. Bringing people on that were going to be hugely responsible for our brand and how we were going to work, and especially because we're so tech enabled as well, making that happen by posting about their laptops and speaking to them on Zoom and all these different bits of software. It was terrifying, but we managed to overcome it. I think part of our nature as being a startup and maybe being millennials, as you said, is that we're quite willing just to get on with stuff and just accept what's happening. And we're not really bruised from decades of industry that we were stuck in our ways. We pivoted to a lot of things pretty quickly, and we made the most of it. And I'd like to think that each and every one of us in the company has managed to enjoy a lot of that time as well by banding together and having solidarity for the challenge.
Yeah, I can identify with some of this at AM Bid that during the pandemic we've got new clients in places we've never been before. And then we've also employed staff that we've never met in person, doing work for clients we've never met in person. Although, as one person said to me, Andrew, I'm meeting you in person I'm meeting you face to face because I can see your face on Zoom or Teams and you can see my face. So he says we are meeting face to face, even if it's not in person. And it's just making that journey. Now I want to talk about technology because, of course, we've just mentioned things like Zoom and Teams and LinkedIn. What part does technology play in your disruption of architecture for homeowners?
It's a huge part of what we do, and we're really switched on and always kind of pushing the technology forwards. We have a very clear idea of why we use technology, though. The reality of the technology is to take away the heavy lifting from the people to do the people stuff. And we've invested heavily in a variety of pieces of technology. We've got software robots that take care of a lot of our admin processes. We've almost tried to look at every piece of admin that could be done as a repetitive process and let technology do that for us. If there's something that we're doing that we feel has been done again and again and again, we'll look to supersede that with technology. And it's one of the things that we don't feel intimidated by individually within our team. We try and seek out ways to make things that we're doing redundant as quickly as possible. And that's what's giving us scale and rapid growth. We obviously use, the virtual reality. We use Revit, which is a really kind of top end architectural software, and we invest very heavily at the start of a project in building things properly because we know we're going to take things all the way through. And we've got a really sophisticated CRM platform. We've pretty much taken the RIBA plan of work, which all architects will be familiar with, and we've completely torn it up. I completely disagree with it. It doesn't work. I don't know how you can prescribe, one plan of work for every type of project. We've taken the best bits of it and we've created our own, and we've built that into a tech platform. I think the opportunity for Hoko is that we're building this brilliant process that's letting small projects thrive at scale. And perhaps one day we can use technology further to let more independent architects change how they work and give them a bigger opportunity to work in a very different way.
Very good. So I'm speaking in Glasgow today, in your head office here in Glasgow. Just 4 weeks ago, of course, Glasgow was very busy with COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Summit. So what I'd like to ask you, Danny, is how is sustainability at the heart of what Hoko is doing as well?
It absolutely is. I mean, we are obviously a paperless office. We do a lot of things in our headquarters. We do all our recycling, all that sort of stuff that's dead easy. On the bigger scale, because we work on so many individual projects, we've got an opportunity and a bit of a moral obligation to feed that rhetoric in. I think the sad truth is that most homeowners that are investing, tens, if not £100,000 on their homes, they get to a point where they don't really care about sustainability anymore. And I say that as a generalization. And that's because once you've got cost and aesthetics in the mix, there's obviously a hierarchy that comes in. And one of the things we've developed a really good skill for is weaving sustainable agendas into a design language that is cost effective, if not cost saving. And aesthetically looks great as well. And there's other things that have fed into that whole scenario. The whole Brexit thing, I kind of miss talking about Brexit now after all this COVID news. It actually seems a bit more interesting now. But not being able to import different materials, we found ourselves specifying, Scott pine as a cladding material rather than Siberian larch. The two can look very similar if dealt with in the right way. And then it's a case of finding local suppliers, building relationships with them. And we managed to do that because we've got such a high volume of work, but also because our architects are constantly on the lookout for stuff that's, local, often recyclable, and it's often seen as the cherry on top for a client rather than necessarily being, the driving force for a project. But we do manage to weave it in quite successfully. And I think as the company grows and we start taking on, thousands of projects per year rather than hundreds, it will be able to kind of negotiate that process and that scenario a lot better as well, with more effect.
Yeah, good. Well, when we did our work, as I say, 13 years ago, we put an air source heat pump in, and it's still pumping away 13 years
good.
later.
Yeah.
We put solar panels in, full PV system 10 years ago, and an EV charging point 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So I am really up with the renewables,
Yeah.
and a great fan of them. And looking forward to just seeing that happen more and more often now.
COP26 was such a big thing that happened in Glasgow. It sparked so many conversations, and we've got a partnership, and it's a secret project that we're working on that's been inspired by COP. So maybe your listeners and your followers will end up keeping an eye out for that, because it could be quite an exciting thing we're going to be announcing in the new year.
Good. Sounds interesting. Very good. I'll tell you what I'm looking forward to maybe is in time the energy performance certificate that properties have to have. It'll be good when that reflects renewables a bit more.
Yeah.
Because, having spent a lot of money on renewables, I don't know if it would necessarily completely translate into the energy performance certificate, because it's still around the sort of gas boilers and things like that. So
yeah, absolutely.
It'll just be interesting to see how things move on with that in time as well. Now, I want to talk about your team, and I must say I've met a very motivated team. I arrived here about 5:15, and most of them are still in the office, still seeming to be enjoying their work, but getting ready for going home and getting on with the rest of their lives. How have you put together your team, and what are the Hoko values that attract people to come and work here and to actually stay here as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's obviously one that's very close to my heart. We've grown tremendously quickly. We were at around 6 staff this time last year. We're now at 35. It's been an incredibly exciting and enjoyable process growing a team, and it's probably the absolute backbone of what we do. Culture, we talk about it all the time in the office, and it really is a superpower. And I think it's one of the things that I felt quite passionate about as we've kind of tried to disrupt architecture, because solving the problem for the homeowner is great, but having worked in different construction consultancies, construction as a whole is reasonably toxic. You have to be pretty tough to be able to live in that environment where it's so conflict heavy, and especially in architecture, I think it's quite hierarchical as well. And that certainly came across through university, and how they articulate what the industry is going to be like for you, and it can be scary. And I think one of the things that I wanted to create was an environment where people wanted to be. So I mean, you're here in effectively our living room space. We didn't just cram this space full of desks. One of the metrics that I kind of measure my own performance about, and the performance of my management team, is people have the option to work from home. Why do they choose to come here? They set up things for each other. We do a regular 7-a-side on a Tuesday night. People have cinema days in here, all sorts of different things. And what you find when you have an environment where people feel like they're respected, they've got responsibility, they can take on new challenges, they can make mistakes and not be told off. And if there is a problem, that it's the kind of the directors or the manager or me who's going to be there to catch it, because fundamentally that's our responsibility. You find that people change from just being colleagues to becoming friends. And then once people become friends, it can grow to something much more like a family. And businesses talk about families all the time, but it's a bit of a buzzword, and I really don't really know how much people actually go into that. But what it means to be a family is that you do anything to catch each other when you got problems. So when people have problems outside of work, we get involved, we help each other. And the very nature of being a very fast growing startup, especially in architecture, which is such a prestigious industry, is that people feel responsible. They feel proud of themselves. They're part of something real and exciting and cool. And we've got a really young team. We do a lot of things to promote culture in the office as well. So I don't know if you follow our Instagram, Hoco Design Limited, but we do lunchtime activities. And a lot of people don't really understand why we do that. So 20 minutes a day, someone will be nominated and they'll have to come up with an activity for us to do. Could be a game of hide and seek, could be drawing each other, it could be writing down something positive about another member of the team, and then we all read them out, something like that. But it's usually reasonably energetic, and it gets people out of the seat. It gets them laughing, joking, having fun, and it gives them a bit of a buzz for the afternoon. And it's also something really exciting in the morning to look forward to. And I think one of the most powerful things that we do is on someone's first day, they're responsible for the lunchtime activity. And if you can imagine going into your job for your first day, it's so stressful. You don't want to get plonked at a desk and everybody ignore you and you sit about twiddling your thumbs. You want to do stuff. And getting told that everybody in the office is going to do an activity that you prescribe to them, straight away you see people filled with panic. Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? That you see them texting their friends and all sorts. But when they stand up and say, right, we're going to have a karaoke day. We're going to have 20 minutes of karaoke, whatever it's going to be. And everybody just goes, right, let's do it. That's them at their most vulnerable. And they get instant solidarity and they're straight away part of the team. And I think it's something that's really helped us, especially mitigate, booms in workload and challenges with COVID and all that sort of stuff. And there's a huge amount of trust that goes both ways. And I think it's something that's going to be our biggest challenge to keep that as we grow. But we've got some ideas we're going to kind of bring out the bag, I think, for next year to make that even more exciting.
Very good. Well, here we are in the 2020s. It's very different to when I started work in the 1980s, and people were getting sent out for a long stand.
Yeah.
And the person would say in the shop, just go and stand over there. And
yeah.
then 10 minutes later, the young employee would say, what's happening to the long stand? And the guy would say, you've just had it.
Yeah.
Or been sent for a tartan paint.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, it sounds really good. And do you know what? People are looking for this. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for more than just salary.
Yeah.
And they're looking for reasons to be part of a team and to stay. So that's great. Now, you started here in Glasgow. Where have you expanded to? I understand it's a number of cities. And what other ones do you have on your horizons?
So you're totally right. We're starting in Glasgow. We're covering projects in Edinburgh, Stirling, and all around kind of the central belt. We've got an architect up in Inverness, so right at the top of Scotland, Birmingham, Brighton, Bristol, and London. So we're covering a decent portion of that kind of Midlands part of England and the southeast. Over the course of the next 12 months, funded by our crowdfunding campaign, which is live at the moment, we're looking to take on another 20 architects. So they'll be individual architects in individual locations. And I think with that, we'll be able to cover almost every home in the UK. And that's really where we're looking to get to. That's kind of our ambition for the next 12 to 18 months.
Great. And we'll come on to the crowdfunding campaign in a minute, which is live at the moment on Crowdcube. But even before the crowdfunding, you've attracted investment from some pretty big name investors. Could you tell me, what do they see the potential of this business as?
I think they can see two things which are particularly exciting. I think the first thing is there's a market which is pretty underserved, and there's a massive opportunity for that market to be disrupted by technology in particular. I think that is a huge prize for whoever can figure out how to do small projects at scale. I think the other thing that they've seen is that I've never worked for an architecture practice before. I have managed to become an architect through my own practice, which is incredibly unusual. And they see a very driven young team that is unburdened by industry war wounds, stigmas, preconceived ideas, and we're willing to deconstruct the status quo and come up with something new. And our purpose-driven mentality has kept us focused. Every big decision we make is based upon getting closer to our purpose, and we don't get distracted by property development or doing 3D models and random little bits and bobs. And I think it's that focus, along with our background, that's really made us quite an attractive proposition. I think they see us becoming the market leader in the UK pretty soon. And I think maybe beyond that, they see an international company that will be backed by technology. And improving your home is an innate human need, and it's a market which is always there and always seeming to grow. And I think they believe that we're the ones that are going to do it.
Okay, great. Now, you mentioned about the crowdfunding round. It's given a company valuation of £15 million. So how is the crowdfunding going, and how can people find out more about it?
So the crowdfunding is on Crowdcube. So it's one of the leading crowdfunding websites. If you type into Crowdcube and Hoco, will pop up pretty quickly. It's going really well. We're almost at our funding goal, so we'll hopefully be there in the next week or so. We've been absolutely blown away by the level of support we've had. We've had people putting in six-figure sums to get behind us. What we've proven over the last 2.5 years is that we go into a region and we find work and we deliver on our promises. We're now in the top 5 highest reviewed companies on House out of more than 15,000 architects. We've shown that we are client focused. We've shown that our technology works, and we've shown that we've got a team that's built on a very strong culture. The market size is absolutely enormous. The home renovations market is expected to reach £50 billion next year. There is no market leader. That is the scale of the opportunity. There's a market leader position there for the person who gets to it first. The days of big versus small have gone. It's now fast versus slow. And I think we're one of the fastest moving, not just architecture firms in the UK, but businesses in general. And that's why we're picking up awards that are not industry specific. So it's one of these things where we're opening ourselves up to the general public and our clients to get behind us. And we've closed down conversations with VCs and things before because we feel like we're a company driven by a purpose for the people, and we want them to have the opportunity to back us as well.
Yeah, very good. So, inspiration-wise, who would you say has inspired you?
That's a really quite a difficult question to answer. I feel like I'm inspired by people constantly. I'm always inspired by my team. every single one of them, in particular my management team. Fraser, Anya, Simon, they're my fellow directors, and they take on so much responsibility. Their diligence, their work ethic, their enthusiasm, their humor, everything is it's a constant inspiration for me, and we've got so much solidarity for each other. It's a lovely thing. Out with Hoko, I'm inspired by my immediate family. My father is a really successful surgeon, and has dedicated his life to working with the NHS and quite physically transforms people's lives. My younger brother as well, a hugely inspirational person whose outlook on life is the polar opposite to mine. He lives completely in the moment, and he is just a really lovely person who just accepts everyone and everything, and I find him a constant joy to be around, um, especially because I live so much in the future all the time. So I think my immediate family, in particular my brother and my management team, have been a constant source of inspiration for me. I've read other successful people's books and stuff, but when it's so close to home and I've got such a richness of my immediate environment, I feel like that sort of stuff just doesn't quite get through.
Okay, great. Now, you've also got a young family, so I'm interested how you sort of blend work, rest, and play.
Yeah, so that's I've got kind of a few different components to my life. I've got the business, which is hugely exciting. I've got my young family, and I still do a lot of sports and play rugby and things. I think the key to being able to achieve that level of balance is by having an amazing wife. So she and myself, we had this news we were going to have our oldest son when I just started the business, and she was just completing her PhD. She's a very highly intelligent person, could have applied herself to any number of career paths. And we decided between us that she was going to be the leader of the childcare and the home and the family, and I would pursue the business and our future essentially. It's not lost on me that her job is infinitely more important and probably infinitely more difficult than my own as well. But we find that partnership and that division of responsibilities really works for us. And I feel like I'm incredibly lucky to be able to have them in such a safe environment, and to be able to provide that, especially from a young age as well, where she didn't go back to work, and she is a full-time mum, and she does an incredible job of that. I find that probably equally as inspiring as anything else. In terms of managing my own time, I go to bed really early. There was a day last week where I was in bed by 7:30, fast asleep. So I get up really early as well, whilst managing to get a pretty good sleep. So I usually will try and get some exercise done in the morning. Exercise is one of these things that just releases so much energy for you. I think there's so much discussion right now in the media about mental health and difficulties for mental health. And I've just taken on a position with a leading mental health charity as an ambassador, which will be announced shortly as well. And that's not because I've necessarily had problems with mental health, but it's because the level of pressure and having strategies to cope with that. And one of those for me is getting up early. So that's how I managed to get the play bit in.
Very good. Well, it was great to hear some of these things that you've mentioned there, Danny. We're hearing more people now, it seems, take pride that there is a full-time mum or a full-time dad.
Yeah.
They're actually, giving credence to that. I benefited from having a full-time mum who actually, before I went to school, I could read, and I could do lots of sums and lots of things. It was amazing. So it's great to hear. So final question is, what advice would you give to a young person or a person of any age who's thinking about, to some extent, following in your footsteps, setting up their own business?
I think the fundamentally most important thing to figure out is what purpose you want that business to serve. I'm the same as you. I benefited from having a full-time mum at home, and it's a life-changing experience that you don't fully appreciate until you're older. And she gave me some advice which always stuck with me, which was, if you find something that you really enjoy, you'll never have to work again. And it kind of comes back to your first question about what makes me tick, and it's competitiveness. And I went into architecture partly because I had a bit of a knack for graphic design, and when you're kind of at school, you need to kind of tell people what you're doing. So I went into something I thought was respectable, but over time I realized that what really made me tick was competitiveness. And I've managed to channel that into a purpose. And I have no trouble bouncing out of bed at 4 every morning to come and do my job. And that's because it's something that I love. And that comes with the pressure and the stress, and the problems and the conflict and all those sorts of things that are part of business. But if you have something that you're fundamentally passionate about that you would do for free, then you should start a business about it. And if you start a business about it, your enthusiasm will be genuine, your motivation will be long lived, and you'll get fulfillment from it. So that would be my advice.
Well, very interesting. I mean, I read somewhere, I can't remember the stat, but it's a large number, much more than 50% of entrepreneurs get up quite early in the morning. I do myself. I'm up by 6 o'clock every day, and a long lies at the weekend, 7 o'clock. And yeah, I think you've given us some great insights there, Danny. So thank you very much for inviting me here to the head office of Hoco, and it's definitely a business I'm going to be watching very closely. And all the best with the crowdfunding campaign.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew.